Facebook and Twitter. Thank you so much for joining us again. As I say, we are very happy to have with us debut author Lynn Steger Strong and her new book, Hold Still. Evoking finely wrought characters reminiscent of those by Claire Massoud or Elizabeth Strout, debut author Lynn Steger Strong traces the anatomy of a mistake and the weight of culpability. Heralding the arrival of a profoundly moving new talent, Hold Still explores the depths and limits of a mother's love. Lynn holds a MFA in fiction from Columbia University, where she taught freshman writing. She lives right here in South Florida with her husband and two young daughters. I would like to say also that the author, Elizabeth Albert, the author of After Birth, says, Hold Still is an unblinking examination of family, the mother-child bond, and the storms it must withstand. Lynn Strong pulls no punches in considering not just how deep, but also how misguided a mother's love can be. Will you please give your warmest books and books welcome to Miss Lynn Steger Strong.
Thanks for coming, you guys. I'm going to read from the beginning, so you don't hopefully need to know much. I'm going to read the prologue and then an early chapter. Maya wants to go in with her. They've been out all day, their last in Florida. Ellie's 8 and wants to swim just one more time before they go. The sun has fallen past the dunes and the sky is pink and blue and purple. Maya's daughter stands, smiling, sunny, salty, sandy, and promises that she'll be fine, that Maya doesn't have to go in too. Maya's already pulled on her pants and sweater. She's almost always cold, even here, where, even in winter, it's warm right up to hot. She stands up to where the waves come in thin films of foam over her ankles, her sweater held tight around her, her toes curled into the sand and bits of broken shells, and Ellie bounds away in front of her, past the point where the sand drops off, her tiny body quickly swallowed up. Maya watches Ellie let herself fall forward, arms reaching up and shoulders rolling. She dives down beneath the waves and comes up twice, and, all at once, Maya wants her daughter next to her, warm and wrapped up tight. But Ellie's vertical again and treading water. Her head is small and dark, and her curly hair is matted tight around her skull. The water dips as the pressure builds beneath her, and Ellie's shoulders pop up and out, light brown now with a smattering of freckles. Her bathing suit is yellow with tiny purple dots. Maya calls, "Come in, Elle," but Ellie doesn't hear her. The water settles. Another wave forms 100 feet away. The curve of it grows, and Ellie's still and small and getting smaller. Maya's chest and neck get hard. Elle, she calls as if she'll hear her, as if somehow her screaming will keep the wave from crashing down. Ellie's head is there, and then it isn't, and Maya breathes in once, then out. And then she's running, diving, swimming. She kicks, and gulps of water fall into her throat. She has to keep her eyes open so she can see where Ellie is, and they sting sharp, her vision blurring. She grabs hold of her chest, and the slick softness of her bathing suit are held tight in Maya's arms. She's still wearing her sweater, which is heavy now with the weight of water, salt, and sand. Elle, she says. She thinks she sees her daughter smile. Maya holds tight to Ellie and drags her up to shore. Maya pants, and Ellie's breath is even. "Ma, I'm fine," she says. Maya will not let go of Ellie for the next 100 years. And then this is early. Something terrible has happened. Maya stands and runs. She heads straight to Bergen, down toward Court Street, past Atlantic, Brownstone, 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 Big Park, Courthouse, crossing over the Brooklyn Bridge. One foot, then the other. It's the simplest thing she does all day. She never listens to music, and she almost always runs alone. She likes the sporadic snippets of the city's sounds before it's fully risen. A baby screaming through an open window, a car horn, a garbage truck backing up the wrong direction on a one-way street. She likes the smells, exhaust and baking bread, the unidentified chemicals as she crosses the Gowanus. The water is so thick with waste that the trash doesn't float, half submerged. It just sits solidly on top. It's the sort of morning that she loves and lets herself hold tight to. The air just cold and dry enough to catch sharp inside her lungs. The inclines change incessantly. She's up and down, and then her arms are swinging harder. Her body doesn't give her what it used to. She's slower now, but no less determined to push and push. Her legs are long, almost as long as Stephen's, though he's at least 6 inches taller than her. Their hips hit at nearly the same point, and they stretch out far in front of her. The ball of each foot hits the pavement. Her knee bends, her foot rises nearly to her ass. Once in Manhattan, she heads south on Broadway to the bottom of the island, to the seaport where boats are docked and sloshing in the Hudson and the smells are strong of rotted fish. Then west and through the steep slate of the memorials in Battery Park. This stretch along the Hudson is usually filled with runners and tourists in line to take the ferry to Liberty Island. But she's so early, she has the whole thing to herself. The space of cobbled concrete and small parks, the sailboats, the volleyball nets lined up on rubber courts. Just past a set of docks with sailboats in a row, Maya stops and slips her shoes off. The wind bites through the tights she's wearing, gnawing sharply along her skin, and her bare face smarts. Small drops of water reach her as she walks closer to the edge. She wears no gloves, and the fence that separates her from the water is cold and sticks to her fingers as she holds on and climbs up over top. The water's gray slate with tiny whitecaps forming out closer to New Jersey. She can see Liberty Island, boats knocking against their moorings another 100 feet away. She settles herself carefully onto the other side of the fence, half hanging over the water, her hands holding tightly to the metal bars. Cold drops splash up onto the balls of her feet and around her ankles. The water feels warm at first compared to the whip of the air. She looks out toward New Jersey, the Statue of Liberty almost completely obstructed by the early morning fog. The ledge is brick, and the edges catch against the bottoms of her thighs, and she feels her tights pilling. She has to alternate the hand she uses to hold the fence behind her, as the sting of it is only bearable for small stretches of time. Her whole life she's been a strong swimmer. She thinks, if it weren't for the nearly inevitable hypothermia, she'd be able to get to New Jersey before the sun is up. And just for that moment of going under, those few seconds after the initial shock of the cold, when the water has reached just above her neck and she's about to pull her whole self under, it might be worth whatever else might come as a result. Ellie, 17. Maya would peek over her shoulder. She would grab Ellie's phone and check the text messages when Ellie went into the bathroom or once she'd gone to sleep. She would hack into Ellie's email and her Facebook. There were rules and boundaries about trust and fairness and giving children space that she believed in right up till she didn't anymore. Until trust felt like a silly word that was just standing in the place of actually doing something to save her daughter. A privilege reserved for people with lives much less complicated than theirs. She knew Ellie was at a party. She had an address on 4th Street and 8th Avenue, not far from where they lived. She thought she'd have to knock, but had no real plan for what she'd say or do when someone answered. Except when she came up to the door, it was ajar, and she could hear people talking, and the thrum of music knocked her brain against her skull. She walked in, still not knowing what she'd do. She expected to see him, maybe find him in some back room with her daughter. She settled herself for the possibility of catching her daughter fucking someone while a party raged outside the door. It didn't take long to find Ellie, though, and she wasn't fucking anyone. At least not right then. And Dylan was quiet, the only one in the room who didn't seem to be enjoying himself. Maya stood in the hall, looking into a great room, and watched her daughter. There was nothing preventing someone walking past and seeing her. This middle-aged woman, hair tied in a knot, bare-faced, in jeans and a fraying Harvard sweatshirt, snooping on these kids. But she stayed still because she had to. Once she saw her daughter, she didn't care who found her there. Ellie was drunk, something worse than drunk. She was in her underwear, beige and laceless, simple, something Maya had probably bought on sale. There were 2 other girls who stood with Ellie, but it was clear based on their posture, based on the shock of her daughter's beauty laid out so bare before her. Ellie was in charge. When it came to the commodity of beauty, her daughter was so rich with it she could parse it out to anyone who chose to look. Maya watched the other girls, confined by the need to be self-conscious. They shaped their faces and twisted and turned in ways they hoped might complement their best attributes. But there was no part of Ellie not worth showing off. and Maya wished for the millionth time that her daughter might be slightly less attractive. The eyes, the hair, the way the legs shone as Ellie dipped down to the floor. It was a dangerous commodity to bestow on anyone so reckless and so young. There were a handful of boys, some men, around the girls. Music played, and the girls danced, and the men watched them. Dylan sat back on the couch close to the kitchen and sulked as Ellie held court. Maya's daughter's hips jutted out from underneath the satin string that connected the front and back stretch of fabric that still covered her. She stood up on her toes and dipped down nearly to the floor. She walked over to one of the other girls and placed both hands on her shoulders. She came in very close to her, and their breasts touched, and Maya held her breath. Ellie took one hand off the girl and ran her fingers down the length of her, lingering once at her breasts and then her belly button, dipping her body farther and farther down. She bent her head back once she reached the girl's knees, her hands wrapped around the girl's thin hips. Maya took her eyes briefly from her daughter and watched the men around her. Their eyes stayed wide and rapt. They were quiet, sipping beers and smoking, but hardly moving otherwise, as Maya's daughter dipped and twirled. Just to do questions, right? Anybody? Questions? Okay. With teenage daughters? You already had them. You always have children hoping yours are immune, right? You have to pretend. That's even why you have the second child, is that you hope that that one will be nicer than the first one. Is that, I don't,
We're not afraid so much about our kids.
You're afraid about my kids.
We're about, your kids are our kids.
Yes, yes.
But we're not afraid about our kids as much as the other kids,
Right.
Because our kids don't do that kind of stuff.
Oh, of course.
They don't get out of the other
They
kids.
would never do it. They would never do it.
But
Not yours. No.
Never.
I think, okay, I'm going to take that seriously because I think that that's sort of why I wrote this, right? Because, I was about to have kids, and then I did have kids while I was writing, because it takes a long time to write a book. Right? No, while I was birthing the kids. I think I wrote it because I wasn't a great teen. I was afraid a little bit my kids would turn out like me. And I was kind of reckless. But when I had kids, I realized that what was scarier wasn't all the fucked up things my kids were going to do, because inevitably kids do scary things. But was I wanted to know that I would always love them. I wanted to trust that it didn't matter, because that wasn't necessarily my model. And when I had them, I believed in that so strongly. It was also just really interesting to me that I never thought that there were situations in one's life where one might not have an exit strategy. And when I had kids, I had no exit strategy. And that idea being something really beautiful felt worth writing a book about, because my kids are going to fuck up. But what's interesting is how I will deeply love them and how strange that will be and how that will make me culpable in all the ways that they fuck up. And it's also exciting to me that we're capable of that. Serious answer. I might do that.
They knew what they.
They stayed in line. You don't know what they were doing.
Oh,
though.
no. Listen, they're 29, 20,
Right.
and 30.
Right.
Now when I hear the stories, it's like.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of stuff,
Yeah,
but the
yeah.
stuff that I don't is like, oh yeah, Mom, we never told you what we did this.
Right, and most kids turn out just fine. So, I don't know. Yeah. Sure.
The way that you structured time in it.
Yeah.
How you set it up to do that, and how, even the process itself, the physical process of getting there.
Like notes.
Yeah. I was least of all interested in the event, and most of all interested in sort of culpability and aftermath. And I thought, so the book goes back and forth between the mother, a year after the event, and the daughter in the months leading up to the event. And so the mother's sort of making sense of her culpability, and the daughter is enacting her culpability. And I guess I think what fiction gives us that like just normal people telling you stories or living life doesn't give us is the ability to understand how past and present and future are all piled up on top of one another. And so I wanted to sort of collide a past with a present and a future to show how those things are constantly in conversation, and how like a mother's past is as important to a daughter as the daughter's present, and how a daughter's future is as important to a mother as a daughter's. I've lost my train. It's all important. Also, I did a lot of color-coded index cards. 3.5 years. Yeah, sir. What am I? Well, if you read the book, I mean, so there's Virginia Woolf, and then there's everybody else. Faulkner's like up there, but I mean, more contemporary. I appreciate the. I'm a huge Elizabeth Strout and Claire Massoud fan, but Virginia Woolf, I think, taught me that fiction could do things I don't think anything else in the world can do. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. I have a almost 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. So I have written nursing a baby on my phone. I have written pushing a stroller while typing on my phone. I used to have rituals, but then I had kids. So I write on the subway. I write. For a while, our daughter got up between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. She would only sleep if she was holding my face, so I wrote while she did that. My ritual is like I'm desperate to write all of the time, so if I can see time in front of me, I'll try to fit it in. When I was writing this, I had something else. I just that idea of like taking time, right? Like always wanting to write. It doesn't, I think, always come. So I always have a couple of other things. Like I'm writing a bunch of essays right now because they don't make you do that, but they sort of make you do that to get your name out there. So I'm writing a bunch of essays right now that are a little bit. They just feel like a different part of my brain, but the same part. So I can fiddle with an essay until a fiction idea comes, or I can fiddle with a part of fiction, work on like syntactical stuff before another idea comes. Like I like to have multiple things so that I feel productive. I'm afraid if I'm not productive, I'll die.
Your idea of where your story was going, or did it unfold as you were writing?
Yeah, no, I mean, I thought I did 3.5 years ago, or 5 years ago now. No, I had no outline. I was writing the mom, and then the mom is like very self-contained, and so one day I just like needed to be less repressed and started writing the daughter. I mean, it was all very. The closest thing to an outline is I took apart Virginia Woolf. I made a sort of outline of Mrs. Dalloway into the lighthouse, and tried to figure out. It's like computer people tried to figure out how that worked. And then threw all of that away and started working again, and then like realized later I'd like embedded some of those things in my book. Yes, sir.
iPhone or your computer or laptop or whatever you use?
Everything. I mean, I teach at a couple different universities, so a lot of times I'm on the subway, so I'm writing that way, or if I'm giving the students group work, I can type on my computer and look like this is being videoed. Yeah, I mean, again, like everything. I think that there is something really exciting and fun when you're first starting of handwriting. And then there's something that feels like official about typing. And they're both useful, I think. Yeah. Yeah, always. I mean, not not in the beginning because that would be painful. But yeah, I mean, I think the last, like actually the final, the second to final edits, my editor sent me and then just sent me an email with the word no because she knew that I would read it all out loud and then get like it's all fiddly again. Um, yeah, I read it all. The sound is really important to me. I'm not like a metaphor person. I'm not like my sentences are short mostly, so it's not on the level of like description. It's hopefully on the level of like how you experience the words running through your brain. So it has to be read out loud or that experience wouldn't be good. Yes. How did I find my editor? With my agent. I the greatest gift. I went to an MFA program. I had one agent, and then I a professor of mine, a couple of professors of mine got me in touch with a couple of different agents, and then I met with a couple of them, and my agent, whom I found, and I both cried talking about books in the meeting, and I felt like we were meant to be. And then she chose the editors that we sent it out to. Yeah. Is that it? Yeah, Rachel. Hi.
Very impressed to be able to write a book with 2 young children. How did you get out of the like cave that is mothering babies and toddlers? Like how'd you get in and out, in and out? Like you have to be present with your child, then present with your other child, which is your book.
You're making me anxious that I'm not always present with my children, which is probably true. You know, we were talking to a friend of ours today who has a little kid, and she was talking about how hard it is to find time for yourself, and I felt really lucky in that moment because I'm completely in love with my children in a way that I've never been in love with anything in my life, but I'm as close to in love with writing that I can find a way out, and I have no idea how I would have found my way out without writing, and sometimes it scares me to imagine having had kids and not felt as desperate to write as I do because I would have just stayed in the haze. You know? Stayed in the haze. And sometimes that seems like magic.
What age did you start writing?
I didn't know that writing was an allowed thing to do. I thought that you could only be a lawyer or a doctor. So I was spewing my feelings into Word documents around 19 because I was reading and reading and reading and reading and reading, and it felt like the most astonishing thing. But I still don't, like, I'm still not sure if I'm allowed to say I'm a writer. But I started spewing those feelings around even before that, right? Like I was always doing it, but I wasn't calling it writing. It was just like I was reading, and so I wanted to talk back to the people I were reading, and most of them were dead, so I just started doing that. 14? Is that it? Yeah. Yeah. Other people's books? Yes. Yeah. I'm really interested in the idea that everything's been done before because I think that that's true, and so to focus on that feels pointless. So I'm taking apart all of Shakespeare's plays because they're the most done thing, to try to figure out how all of that could be tipped on its head and subverted while still maintaining whatever it is he accomplishes.
Art's derivative.
Yeah. I like to set the bar, you know.
And can you talk a little bit about your interest in mediocrity?
Yeah, I don't know. I think mediocrity is really interesting because most of our lives exist within it. And I think similar to Wolf, I think that the idea of mediocrity is both terrifying and where all the actual beauty happens. So I'm interested in raising the mediocrity to a level that is at the decibel that I experience it, which is like intense excitement when I touch my kid's head, while maintaining its mediocrity, while maintaining its sort of daily trivialness. I'm very interested in everything always being two things at the same time.
Is fantastic, and yet someone might not think the same way. So I think it's actually the individual who perhaps may think that something is mediocre versus someone else who may think it's the grandest thing in the world, right? I mean,
Yeah. I mean, I think that's
every
sort of
individual is different.
Yeah. That's sort of my point is that I actually think like I mean we're using the word mediocre, which is of course really pejorative, but I think maybe the everyday like I think all of the good stuff I've ever experienced has come inside of the everyday. And like I've done a lot of whatever not mediocre, like I've traveled the world, like I've been to fancy school, I've done all these things that seem not mediocre. And so I think in fiction, what I want to do is find a way to do what you said, right? Like to show that individual experience, to celebrate that individual experience, to portray it as beautiful and exciting and complicated and intense and awful as I experience it, while not making it another thing, you know? So I agree with you completely. Yeah. Is that? No. I come from a family of lawyers. Yes.
What about the idea that art and being a writer or an artist and how it's looked by the rest of society and how difficult that is for you or in a...
I think when you're 22 and you say you want to be a writer, it's really cute at bars. And people sort of nod and you're a waitress and you live in New York and it's hard, but it's still cute. When you're in your 30s and you have kids and you have responsibilities and you're still in New York and it's really expensive and it's terrifying, people are just really curious about when you're going to get a job. And that doesn't go away when you publish a book. But I think that if I wasn't so desperate to do it all the time, I would have stopped because I've been rejected in all sorts of every way. But I think that there's a sort of urgency that you have to feel, and then you still feel bad about yourself a lot of days and you worry that you're not making the right choices, but it doesn't feel like a choice. So you just hope that you can do it as well as you possibly can, and that will make up for how blatantly impractical it is, I guess. Well, right? Like that sounds cute, but like if you have, if it makes you happy when you have rent and kids and you need health insurance and, is tricky, but if you write the shit out of it and you make something that one day you can hold up and say to your kids, like, this is what I was doing, you just hope that it makes them happy in a way that, an extra bedroom in your Brooklyn apartment maybe couldn't. I don't know. Okay.
The birthing process is a creative one. I did as a new mother, so I'm wondering.
I think it got heavier, right? Like it got like I always wanted to do it and I always wanted to spend time doing it, but I think that thing I just said, like I had to write the shit out of it, like it was like I was away from my babies and I had done and the whole world felt heavier, like the news felt heavier because the implications weren't just me, the implications were them too. And so this thing that I was making wasn't a thing for me. It wasn't solely sort of exploratory. It was a thing I was making, like I said, that hopefully one day I could give to them. And so I think that the stakes got a lot higher, but they in every way, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody settle. Hold still. Hold still. The books are for sale at the counter. You can buy them there, and then we'll sit right over here and sign them for you. That was such a wonderful presentation. Can we get another round of applause for our author? That was great. For those of you that are watching online, give us a call. As I said before, we'll get a book signed for you and we'll ship it to you. Enjoy the rest of your evening. We've got some live music coming up. We've got a great restaurant. We've got Lynn. We've got books. What else could you ask for on a Friday night? Thank you so much for being here.